The quiet neighborhood looked perfect from the outside. Clean sidewalks, peaceful homes, and a solar-powered grid that made everyone proud. But one morning, Ethan Brooks noticed something strange. His solar system meter was spinning faster than it ever should have. At first, he thought it was a glitch. Ethan had spent years saving money to install a powerful solar grid on his property. It powered his house, his workshop, and even sent extra electricity back to the city grid. The system was supposed to make life easier. Instead, it slowly turned into a mystery. Every evening the numbers on his energy app jumped higher. Way higher than his own house could ever use. Ethan checked every appliance, every wire, every connection. Nothing explained the sudden drain. Then came the whisper from a neighbor. Someone mentioned seeing a sleek electric car parked near Ethan's back fence late at night. A Tesla. Quiet. Silent. Almost invisible in the dark. That's when Ethan started wondering if the problem wasn't inside his house at all. What if someone else was using his power? He didn't want to accuse anyone without proof. After all, this neighborhood was run by a strict HOA, and disputes could get messy quickly, but the numbers kept rising. One night Ethan checked the meter again and saw something impossible. His solar grid was pushing out energy long after his home lights were off. Someone was taking it, and when Ethan finally decided to investigate, he had no idea the truth waiting on the other side of that fence would change the entire neighborhood forever, because the person quietly using his power wasn't just a random stranger, it was someone who believed the rules didn't apply to her, and Ethan was about to catch her in the act. But what he discovered that night was even more shocking than the electricity theft itself. The real story had only just begun. Ethan didn't rush to conclusions. Instead, he watched. For 3 nights in a row he quietly sat by the window of his workshop, keeping one eye on his solar monitoring screen and the other on the narrow path that ran along his backyard fence. The neighborhood stayed calm, until exactly 11:47 p.m. That was when the numbers jumped again. Ethan leaned forward, staring at the screen. The system showed a massive draw of electricity, far beyond what his house could use. Then he heard it, a soft rolling sound, not loud, not obvious. Just the quiet hum of tires on pavement. Through the dim streetlight glow, Ethan saw the silhouette of a car slowly pull up beside the side gate that separated his yard from the HOA maintenance path. The car was unmistakable, a silver Tesla. The driver stepped out. Even in the dark, Ethan recognized her immediately. It was Linda Parker, the HOA board member who loved reminding everyone about neighborhood rules, the same woman who once sent Ethan a warning letter because his mailbox paint was too bright. Now she was standing beside his fence, opening the side gate. Ethan watched carefully. Linda walked directly to the small outdoor outlet Ethan had installed years ago for maintenance equipment. She plugged in a thick charging cable, and just like that, the Tesla began quietly pulling power straight from Ethan's solar grid. No permission, no hesitation, just quiet confidence. Ethan sat there stunned. The very person who enforced the neighborhood rules had been secretly using his electricity, night after night, and judging by the numbers on his meter, she had been doing it for weeks. But Ethan didn't rush outside. Instead, he slowly reached for his phone, because if Linda Parker thought she could take his power without anyone noticing, she was about to learn something important. Ethan Brooks believed in patience, and sometimes the quietest response created the loudest consequences. Ethan knew one thing for certain: if he wanted the truth to matter, he needed proof. The next morning he installed 2 small security cameras facing the side gate and the outdoor outlet. They were discreet, hidden beneath the edge of the fence where no one would notice. Then he waited. 2 nights passed with nothing unusual. Ethan almost wondered if Linda had sensed something and stopped, but on the 3rd night, the meter jumped again. 11:47 p.m., right on schedule. The camera alert lit up Ethan's phone. He opened the footage. There she was. Linda Parker stepped out of her silver Tesla with the same confident walk she used at HOA meetings. She glanced around quickly, then opened the side gate and connected the charging cable. The camera recorded everything: the license plate, the cable, the outlet, even her face under the dim streetlight. Ethan watched quietly as the Tesla began charging once again from his solar system. The footage continued for hours. At 2:15 a.m., Linda unplugged the cable, closed the gate, and drove away as if nothing had happened. But now Ethan had the proof, and more importantly, he had the numbers. Weeks of stolen power, hundreds of dollars in electricity, all taken by someone who constantly warned neighbors about respecting community standards. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. Still, he didn't rush to confront her. Instead, he spent the next few days documenting everything. Energy logs, camera footage, charging times. Piece by piece, the story became undeniable. But the most surprising part came when Ethan reviewed the HOA rulebook. Buried deep in the pages was a clause Linda herself had helped write. It clearly stated that unauthorized use of another resident's utilities could lead to serious penalties, which meant something interesting. Linda Parker hadn't just broken Ethan's trust, she had broken her own rules. And Ethan was about to make sure the entire neighborhood saw exactly what had been happening after midnight. The next HOA meeting was unusually crowded. Word had quietly spread that Ethan Brooks had something important to discuss. Neighbors filled the chairs inside the small community clubhouse, whispering curiously as the board members took their seats. At the center of the table sat Linda Parker, calm, confident, completely unaware of what was coming. When the meeting reached the open discussion portion, Ethan slowly stood. He held a small tablet in his hands. "Good evening," he said politely. Linda smiled in that familiar HOA board way. "Mr. Brooks, please keep your comments brief." Ethan nodded. "I will. I just wanted to clarify something about our community rules." He tapped the screen. The large TV behind the board suddenly lit up with security footage. The room went silent. The video showed a silver Tesla pulling up beside Ethan's side gate at night. A few neighbors leaned forward, then Linda appeared on the screen, walking calmly to the outlet, plugging in the charging cable. Gasps filled the room. Linda's confident expression faded instantly. Ethan let the video play for several seconds before speaking again. "I noticed my solar grid was losing energy every night," he explained calmly. "So I installed cameras to see what was happening." More footage appeared, multiple nights, multiple charges, clear timestamps, clear evidence. The silence in the room became heavy. One of the other board members slowly turned toward Linda. "Is this accurate?" Linda opened her mouth but struggled to find words. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He simply placed printed energy reports on the table. "These are the power logs," he said. "It totals several weeks of electricity taken from my system." Neighbors looked at each other in disbelief. The woman who enforced the rules had been secretly breaking them, and now the entire neighborhood was watching the truth unfold. But Ethan wasn't finished yet, because what he said next would change far more than just Linda Parker's reputation. The clubhouse remained silent as Ethan spoke. "I reviewed the HOA rulebook carefully," he said, sliding a printed page across the table. One of the board members picked it up and began reading aloud. "Unauthorized use of another resident's utilities may result in financial penalties and disciplinary action." The room shifted uncomfortably, because everyone knew something important. Linda Parker had helped write that rule 3 years earlier. Ethan nodded calmly. "According to the logs," he continued, "the energy used equals roughly $600. A murmur spread through the room, but Ethan wasn't finished. "The rules also say repeat violations can result in additional HOA fines." Several neighbors looked toward Linda again. Her face had turned pale. For years she had enforced every tiny rule in the neighborhood: mailbox colors, lawn heights, parking times. Now those same rules were sitting right in front of her, and they applied to her just as clearly. One of the board members cleared his throat. "Linda, would you like to explain this situation?" She tried to speak, but the words came slowly. I thought the outlet was part of the community grid." A few quiet whispers moved through the audience. Ethan gently shook his head. "It's connected directly to my solar system," he said calmly. "And it has been for years." The board members exchanged looks. They knew the rules, they knew the evidence, and now they knew something else. If they ignored this situation, the entire neighborhood would lose trust in the HOA. Finally, the board president spoke. "We will review this matter immediately." But Ethan simply nodded and sat down, because the real impact wasn't the money, it was the lesson, and the consequences were about to spread far beyond one late-night charging cable. Within days, the story traveled across the neighborhood, not through rumors, through facts. Neighbors had seen the footage. They had read the energy reports. And most importantly, they had watched the HOA board struggle with a rule that suddenly applied to one of their own. The board held a private meeting the following week. When the announcement finally arrived, it was short and direct. Linda Parker would step down from her position on the HOA board. She would also reimburse Ethan for the electricity and pay the standard violation fee written in the rulebook. For many residents, the decision felt like a turning point. For years, HOA meetings had been tense. Small rules had created big arguments. People had quietly worried about letters appearing in their mailbox over tiny details, but now something had changed. The rules were no longer one-sided. Ethan didn't celebrate. He didn't post about it online or argue with anyone in the neighborhood. Instead, he quietly fixed the outlet near the side gate, adding a secure lock to prevent any future confusion. One afternoon, as he worked in his yard, a neighbor stopped to talk. "Honestly," the man said, "you handled that better than most people would. Ethan simply smiled. It wasn't about revenge, he replied, it was about fairness. The neighbor nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the strongest message didn't come from anger or confrontation. Sometimes it came from patience and proof, but there was still one final moment Ethan hadn't expected, because a few days later, someone knocked on his front door, and when Ethan opened it, he found Linda Parker standing there. Ethan opened the door slowly. Linda Parker stood on the porch, looking very different from the confident HOA leader everyone once knew. For a moment neither of them spoke, then Linda held out a small envelope. "I wanted to apologize," she said quietly. Inside the envelope was a check covering the electricity, the fine, and an additional amount Ethan hadn't expected. "I didn't realize how much power I was using," she admitted. "And I didn't realize how wrong it was." Ethan studied her expression. This wasn't the same tone she used at HOA meetings. This was something else, humility. "I appreciate you coming here," Ethan said calmly. Linda nodded. "I spent years reminding people to follow the rules," she said. "I guess I forgot those rules apply to me too." For the first time since the story began, the tension finally faded. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The solar grid powered Ethan's home exactly the way it was meant to. HOA meetings became quieter. And people seemed a little more thoughtful about how they treated each other. Sometimes the biggest lessons didn't come from arguments, they came from simple moments when the truth finally came to light. And in the end, Ethan didn't just protect his electricity, he reminded an entire neighborhood that fairness works best when everyone plays by the same rules. And that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you love the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.